and leaving you. And I've already sold the house to move in with my new girl. Good luck finding a place." Alan's voice crackled through the phone, ending in a smug chuckle before the line went dead. Natalie Pierce, 43, sat silently in the conference room of Graven Hall Group, her eyes focused on her client across the polished mahogany table. She didn't feel heartbreak. She felt relief. Alan thought he'd pulled off the perfect betrayal: sell the house, vanish with his new fiancée, and leave Natalie scrambling. What he didn't know was that she'd planned for this moment. 2 years ago, after his cryptocurrency meltdown, she quietly refinanced the house through her company. Graven Hall Group Properties LLC held the deed. The mortgage was paid from her business account. Legally, Alan had no claim. He'd tried to sell something that wasn't his. Natalie wasn't falling apart. She was getting ready to strike back. Natalie Pierce had built her life brick by brick, deal by deal. At 43, she was one of the top commercial real estate brokers in Jersey City, founder and CEO of Graven Hall Group Properties. What had started as a modest one-room office above a sandwich shop had grown into a thriving firm representing high-end industrial and retail clients across northern New Jersey. Every contract signed, every square foot sold, it all came from her tireless effort. 15 years of grit, missed weekends, long drives, and late-night emails. She wasn't born into success. She earned it. Natalie grew up in Newark, watching her mother struggle after her father walked out. The eviction notice, the power shutoffs, the quiet tears behind closed doors. They burned themselves into Natalie's memory. She learned early that safety didn't come from people. It came from preparation. That lesson shaped every decision she made. So when she married Alan at 25, she believed in the idea of partnership. He was charming, spontaneous, full of grand visions. In the early years, he made her laugh. But as the years passed, charm turned to recklessness. By 35, Alan had gambled away most of their savings at Atlantic City. At 37, he poured money into a restaurant idea with a high school friend. It failed within 6 months, leaving them buried in debt. Then came the cryptocurrency disaster at 41. Alan had gone all in without telling her, and when the market crashed, they were weeks away from foreclosure. Natalie saved them. Again. But that time, she didn't just clean up the mess. She made sure there wouldn't be another. While Alan moped around the house, blaming bad luck, Natalie called Vincent Rodriguez, her trusted real estate attorney, and made a plan. She quietly refinanced their home through her business. Graven Hall Group Properties LLC became the legal owner. The mortgage was paid from her company account. The deed was recorded under the LLC. Alan never asked, never noticed. He didn't read the documents. He didn't care how things worked. Only that they kept working. From that moment forward, Natalie kept everything separate. Business accounts, property holdings, even her retirement portfolio. She remained outwardly supportive, still played the part of the patient wife, but inside, the marriage was done. She didn't trust him. She couldn't. Her best friend Maya knew the truth. Maya had stood beside Natalie since college, quietly encouraging her to protect herself. When Natalie finally confessed everything, about the refinancing, the hidden documents, the LLC, Maya had nodded without judgment. "Smart," she said. "Long overdue." Vincent became her silent backup. He drafted contingency plans, cease and desist letters, ownership transfer paperwork. All of it sat in a secure folder in Natalie's office safe. And then, a few months ago, Alan started asking questions. "Hey, do you know what the house is worth now?" he asked over dinner, feigning curiosity. A week later, she caught him in her home office photographing tax records. He claimed he was trying to understand their finances better. Natalie smiled and nodded. Then she changed every password, moved sensitive documents to her business office, and updated her digital security. Alan was planning something. She could feel it. And when it finally came, she would be ready. Natalie was in the middle of reviewing warehouse specs with a client when her phone buzzed. She glanced down and saw Alan's name. Without excusing herself, she answered quietly. "I'm leaving you," Alan said, almost gleefully. "I sold the house. I'm moving in with Jessica. Good luck finding a place." Then he laughed and hung up. Natalie stared at her phone for a beat, then looked up at Mr. Harrison with a calm smile. "Apologies for the interruption. Now, let's revisit the loading dock specs." She finished the meeting without missing a beat, but inside, her mind was already moving. Alan had finally done it. He thought he'd won. An hour later, she pulled into her driveway. There were boxes by the front door and lights on inside. Natalie walked up slowly, unlocked the door, and stepped inside her own home. Unfamiliar furniture sat in the entryway. Shopping bags and poorly packed boxes cluttered the living room. And there, on her couch, was Alan, smirking, drink in hand, beside a woman in her early 30s with glossy hair and cheap confidence. "Jessica," Alan said, as if surprised. "You're not supposed to be here." "I was curious who you sold the house to," she replied, setting her purse on the console table. Jessica stood. "I'm Jessica, Alan's fiancée. I know this is awkward, but this is our house now. You'll need to find another place to stay." Natalie said nothing. Alan grinned. "The sale is final. The money's transferred. It's done." She walked calmly to the kitchen counter, where a neat stack of documents waited. Purchase agreements, transfer forms, even a fake deed. Kyle understood her. He said, flipping through the pages. "Who's the buyer?" "Sunset Properties," Jessica answered. "A real estate investor Alan knows. They paid cash." Natalie nodded. "Interesting." She stepped out of the room and pulled out her phone. "Vincent, it's Natalie. I'm at the house. Yes, they're here. Can you conference in the title company? I want them to confirm ownership records for this address." She walked back into the living room, placed her phone on the coffee table, and tapped the speaker button. Alan's bravado faltered. "You can't do this. The sale's done." Jessica looked confused. "Alan, what is she doing?" "He can't stop us," he insisted. But his voice had dropped a note. A man's voice came through the phone. "Ms. Pierce, this is Kevin from Horizon Title. We've pulled the property records. This home is owned by Graven Hall Group Properties, LLC. There are no transfers, liens, or pending sales. Ownership has not changed in the past 2 years." The room went still. Jessica's eyes narrowed. "Alan, what the hell is he talking about?" Alan's mouth opened, but no words came. Natalie crossed her arms. She didn't yow. She didn't cry. She watched the first cracks appear. Because this wasn't just a betrayal. It was a crime. And she was ready. Natalie didn't raise her voice. She just stood there, arms crossed, as the silence in the room thickened. Jessica looked between Natalie and Alan, her confusion giving way to dawning realization. "The house doesn't belong to either of us," Natalie said evenly. "It's owned by Graven Hall Group Properties, LLC. That's my company. The mortgage is paid by the business. The deed is held by the business. Alan has no legal claim to it." Vincent's voice came through the speaker again. "Mr. Pierce, under New Jersey law, assets held by a limited liability company are separate from marital property. Even if your name were on the original deed, which it's not, this house has been under Natalie's LLC for over 2 years. You can't sell something you don't own." Jessica's face dropped. "Alan," she whispered, "you told me this was your house. You said it was in your name." "It is," Alan insisted. "We're married. What's hers is mine." Nellie interrupted. That's not how it works. You never filed for divorce. You never even had me served. You just forged my signature and tried to disappear with a house you had no right to." Jessica looked at the forged papers on the counter. "I gave you money," she said slowly. "I gave you money for the down payment. You told me everything was legal." Alan stepped toward her, but she backed away. Just don't." Jessica turned and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. Alan stood frozen. Then he turned to Natalie, his voice breaking. "Look, I messed up, but we can fix this. 18 years, Natalie. Doesn't that count for something?" "You tried to sell my house behind my back," she said. "You lied, you forged my name, and you stole from the woman who carried you through 3 financial disasters. You've been planning this for months, Alan. It wasn't a mistake. It was calculated." He opened his mouth, but she kept going. "I'm filing charges within the hour. Fraud, forgery, attempted theft. You won't be able to talk your way out of this one." Alan slumped against the kitchen counter, the weight of his actions crashing down on him. "Please," he whispered. "Don't do this. I have nothing left." Natalie stared at him for a long moment. "You destroyed your own life," she said quietly. "I'm just refusing to let you take mine with it." She picked up her phone, ended the call with Vincent, and walked to the front door. Alan didn't follow. He just stood there, small, desperate, broken. The same man who had once promised to build a life with her had instead tried to dismantle hers for profit. Natalie walked out into the night, each step steady, certain, and free. This wasn't the end. It was the turning point. And for the first time in 18 years, she was finally choosing herself. Natalie drove straight to the police station. She didn't stop at home. She didn't hesitate. She called Vincent from the road, and by the time she arrived, he was already there, waiting, a thick folder of documentation in hand. Inside were the property deeds, business records, notarized signatures, and a copy of the forged sale documents Alan had left on her kitchen counter. They sat down with Detective Morrison, a seasoned officer who reviewed the file with careful attention. "This is clear-cut," he said after 10 minutes of flipping through the paperwork. "Attempted real estate fraud over $500,000. That's a felony." Natalie nodded. "He forged my name, created fake documents, invented a company that doesn't exist. He's been planning this." Detective Morrison looked up. "We'll process everything and begin the investigation immediately." Natalie gave her full statement, answering every question with composure. Vincent provided legal clarification where needed. There were no tears, no panic, only resolved. Later, sitting in her car outside the station, Natalie allowed herself a moment to breathe. She thought back over the last 6 months. The shift had been subtle at first. Alan staying up late, taking calls in the garage, disappearing for hours without explanation. Then came the new clothes, the sudden interest in their property's value, the fake concern over understanding the finances. She'd told herself he was just restless again. She had chalked it up to his usual cycle of empty ambition. But this wasn't restlessness. It was strategy. Alan hadn't just betrayed her. He'd studied her, watched her habits, dug through her files, all while sleeping under her roof and calling her his wife. And yet, she didn't feel broken. She felt vindicated. Every boundary she had put in place, every legal structure, every document moved to her business office, every separate account, had protected her exactly the way it was meant to. The next morning, Natalie was driving back from a showing when she spotted Alan's car parked outside a 24-hour diner off the freeway. Curious, she pulled into a nearby lot and looked through the window. He was sitting alone, hunched over a cup of coffee, his phone pressed to his ear. His posture was collapsed, his face pale. He was calling someone, maybe a lawyer, maybe a family member, scrambling for a lifeline. Natalie didn't go inside. She didn't wave. She just watched for a moment, then pulled back onto the road. That chapter was closed. That man was no longer her concern. That evening, she returned home to find the house still cluttered with boxes and personal items Alan and Jessica had brought in. Cheap throw pillows, fast fashion, drugstore cologne. She opened the back closet, grabbed a few garbage bags, and began sorting. She didn't slam drawers or tear through anything. She moved with quiet efficiency, bagging everything without attachment. None of it had value. None of it belonged in her home. She dropped the bags by the front door, called a donation center for pickup, and sat on the couch with a glass of wine. This was the man she married. This was who he really was. And finally, she had let him go. The legal wheels began turning almost immediately. Within 48 hours of Natalie filing the police report, Jessica contacted authorities. Betrayed and angry, she wasn't about to go down with Alan. She requested immunity in exchange for cooperation, and the prosecutors agreed. What she turned over was more than Natalie had expected: screenshots of texts between her and Alan, spreadsheets mapping out the fake sale, and detailed notes on the false company Alan had created to pull off the transaction. Jessica confirmed that Alan had planned the entire thing over the course of 3 months, right down to forging Natalie's signature. With her statement and the digital trail, there was no more room for interpretation. It was fraud, clear, deliberate, and calculated. Alan was arrested at home and booked on felony charges. His mugshot appeared in the local news the next morning, tied to attempted real estate fraud over $500,000, 0 cents. Natalie didn't read the full article. She already knew how it ended. Alan hired a criminal defense attorney, but it didn't matter. The evidence was airtight. The fake company, Sunset Properties, was never registered. The tax ID number he used belonged to a long-defunct landscaping firm in another state. Vincent handed over every document to the prosecutor, and together with Jessica's testimony, they built an ironclad case. While Alan scrambled for a deal, Vincent quietly filed the divorce papers. The proceedings were fast. Alan had no assets to fight for, no savings, no stake in Natalie's company, no access to her accounts. He didn't even try to contest the terms. He had nothing left to bargain with. Natalie walked away with everything: the house, the business, the retirement accounts, and most importantly, her peace. With Alan's sentencing scheduled for later in the year, she turned her focus inward. First, she redecorated the house. She stripped the rooms of everything that reminded her of compromise. Out went the dark leather couches Alan had insisted on. Out went the cheap prints he'd bought online to make the house feel more upscale. Natalie replaced them with clean lines, soft earth tones, and natural light. The space finally reflected her, sharp, elegant, unbothered. She refinished the kitchen cabinets, replaced the old tiles with hardwood, turned the guest room into a meditation and reading space. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, every room was hers. Then came the work wins. In the span of 30 days, she closed 3 major deals, including a logistics warehouse contract that landed her a 6-figure commission. Her phone rang non-stop. Referrals flooded in. Clients complimented her focus and tenacity. Natalie hosted a small celebration in her backyard. Just Maya, a few colleagues, and quiet music under string lights. She raised a glass and smiled, not because she had destroyed anyone, but because she hadn't allowed anyone to destroy her. Alan's world, on the other hand, was collapsing. The fraud charge carried up to 10 years in prison. Jessica's cooperation made it near impossible for his attorney to build a defense. Public sympathy was non-existent. His professional credibility, already shaky, evaporated overnight. Natalie never screamed, never posted on social media, never slashed tires or keyed cars. She planned, she documented, She waited. And when the moment came, she executed every legal measure she'd prepared. Her revenge wasn't chaos. It was structure. She didn't fight fire with fire. She fought fraud with facts. And she won. Natalie adjusted to life with Alan faster than even she expected. The silence in the house was no longer lonely, it was peaceful. She no longer woke up with a knot in her stomach, dreading what financial mess she'd have to untangle that day. There were no surprise credit card bills, no panicked phone calls about failed investments, no long, exhausted conversations about how to fix yet another one of his disasters. Her mornings became quiet routines: hot coffee on the patio, early check-ins with her team, and a run through the park with her headphones in. Her business flourished. With no emotional chaos stealing her focus, she poured herself into Gravenhall Group properties. New clients signed on, referrals increased, her calendar filled with real estate showings and investor meetings. She hired 2 new junior brokers to handle overflow accounts and promoted her top-performing associate to partner. For the first time, she wasn't just managing success, she was expanding it. Natalie also began mentoring younger women in commercial real estate. She started with informal coffee chats, but word spread quickly. Within weeks, she'd created a structured monthly mentorship circle. Her message was clear: protect your name, protect your assets, and don't let love blind you to liability. She told them what she wished someone had told her at 25, that charm is not a substitute for integrity, and partnership means shared effort, not silent sacrifice. She showed them how to set up LLCs, how to read deeds, and how to document everything. It wasn't long before she was invited to speak at a Women in Business panel hosted by a national real estate association. Her speech, titled "Ownership is Power," was raw and unapologetic. She shared how she'd rebuilt her financial boundaries after her husband's schemes, and how those boundaries ultimately saved her. A recording of her talk went viral in industry circles. A week later, a popular business blog reached out and asked her to write a guest article. She agreed. The piece, also titled "Ownership is Power," detailed how she structured her assets to withstand betrayal, and how women in business could do the same. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of messages poured in from across the country. Women from all walks of life wrote to her: young professionals, mothers going through divorces, retired executives. They shared their own stories of being taken advantage of being kept in the dark, of surviving financial betrayal. Many simply thanked her for reminding them that they weren't alone. Natalie read every single message. Some made her cry. Others made her furious. But all of them reinforced the truth she had come to live by. There is no shame in protecting yourself. She didn't feel powerful because Alan had failed. She felt powerful because she had chosen to prepare. Because when the moment came, she didn't collapse. She stood. She didn't feel vengeful. She felt free. She no longer flinched when someone mentioned his name. She didn't check his court date or track his updates. She didn't need closure. She had already closed that chapter. Natalie wasn't just surviving. She was thriving. And she wasn't looking back. Alan pleaded guilty to attempted real estate fraud and accepted a reduced sentence in exchange for avoiding jail time. He was sentenced to 2 years of probation, mandatory financial accountability courses, and ordered to pay restitution. The amount would never touch what he'd tried to steal, not just in dollars. She wanted distance. Jessica vanished from his life almost immediately. The moment she realized the money was gone, the house was never his, and the fantasy future she'd been promised was built on lies, she disappeared without a word. She left behind a few of her designer bags and cheap perfume, remnants of a con that had crumbled on contact with reality. Natalie never spoke to either of them again. She poured herself into her company, diving into work with fresh clarity and purpose. She expanded her client roster, added a new team member, and renovated her office, brightening the space with natural light, bold artwork, and warm textures that reflected her style. No more sterile compromise. Every decision was hers. Then came her biggest win yet, a long-term contract with one of the largest commercial developers in New Jersey. It was the kind of deal brokers dream of: high value, recurring commissions, and unmatched visibility. She signed it with calm confidence, her hand steady as she slid the pen across the paper. At home, the changes were even more personal. Natalie redecorated the entire space, not out of necessity, but out of joy. She replaced every piece of furniture Alan had ever insisted on, from the bland dining table to the clunky leather sofa. Her new living room was sleek, warm, and elegant, filled with colors and textures that made her feel alive. The kitchen, once a battleground for finances and blame, was now a sanctuary. She cooked for herself, lit candles, played jazz, and for the first time in nearly 20 years, every square foot of her home felt like hers. There were still moments of memory, of disbelief that the man she once loved had tried to steal everything. But those thoughts didn't haunt her. They simply passed through. Natalie had once feared betrayal so deeply that she built her entire career on control, protection, and backup plans. But now, she didn't operate from fear. She operated from power. She knew she was prepared for anything, not because life would always go smoothly, but because she would never again ignore her instincts. She would never again minimize her worth to keep the peace. And in that space, of protection, clarity, and quiet confidence, Natalie found peace. Not just freedom from Alan. Freedom to be fully herself. Natalie's story isn't just about a cheating husband. It's about foresight. It's about refusing to be caught off guard again. After years of bailing Alan out of one reckless scheme after another, she stopped waiting for him to change. She stopped hoping things would get better. She took control. And when Alan finally revealed who he truly was, trying to sell her house, forge her signature, and run off with another woman, Natalie didn't panic. She opened her files. She called her attorney. And she calmly unraveled the web of lies before they ever had a chance to trap her. Because Natalie had learned something vital. Trust without protection is a liability. So she stopped trusting blindly. She prepared. She protected herself. And when the moment came, she stood her ground without fear. If you've ever felt the slow leak of betrayal, if someone's been draining your peace, your finances, or your confidence, this story is for you. You are not dramatic for drawing a line. You are not cruel for protecting what you've built. And you are never wrong for walking away from someone who only takes. If Natalie's story gave you strength, hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Veiled Fury. Because here, we don't just survive betrayal. We see it coming. We prepare for it. And we rise, smarter, stronger, and more powerful than before.